Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another one of my amazing videos. I don't know if they're amazing, but maybe they are simply because I made them and they're videos. Sure, I'll take it. Why not? So for today, you already have the slideshows. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk a little bit about what a political spectrum is, because this is a concept that is important. It helps us understand where the political parties are and what they stand for in theory. And then when it comes time for you to vote, you'll be able to better understand where you fall. So first things first, a political spectrum, it is a linear line going left to right. And so in Canada, we have the left, my left, and the right. On the left side for the political spectrum, those are people who usually believe that the government should be bigger and should be more involved in the day-to-day lives of Canadians. If you are on the right, that usually means you believe the government should be smaller and less involved. So what does that actually mean? Well, on the left side, you will have people who say that the government should have protections for everything. There should be laws that tell us exactly what to do. Now, this is very, very far left, where you could have complete, total government control. And that's where you actually get into more totalitarian communist regimes. Whereas on the right, you could go so far to beyond libertarian and get into anarchy, where there is no government. Government should not be involved at all. In Canada, we kind of come closer to the center, where we have government involvement with healthcare. Government runs our schools. Government polices our streets. Government defends our borders. Government provides employment insurance. If you're going more left, then you're going to want the government to really be the only provider of schools. You probably don't believe in private schools. If you're on the right, you might say that public schools should be provided, but parents shouldn't have to pay taxes to them if they want to send their kids to a different school. Uh, those on the left say that there should be a universal pharmacare system where Canadians' prescriptions are covered by the government. Those on the right disagree, and they say that's better for the private sector to provide, for companies that are not government run to give benefits to their employees if they choose to. The right side is predominantly more in favor of individual choice. They say that people can make those decisions for themselves. Uh, the left side says humans and people within society can have individual choice, but there are certain things that the government should provide. Uh, Government should provide money to help with things like homelessness and research into diseases and support for people who have lost their jobs. On the right-hand side, you'll have people who say, nope, that should be up for individual people to decide if they want to donate and how much they donate and when they donate. And that's really the difference between the two. The left side typically wants to tax at a higher rate. And the reason for that is because they want to have a bigger government that does more in the individual's lives. The right side typically wants lower taxes because they don't want as big of government, so they don't need as much money to operate things. Uh, in a more extreme right side, and you can see it in the US with the Republicans, where they really kind of want the federal government, really just government in general, to protect the borders, to defend their interests, and that's kind of it. The left side, and you can see this with Bernie Sanders as a social democrat, who is saying that he wants Medicare for all. In Canada, we've kind of moved beyond those conversations, long historical reasons, but even our right side has, our right wing political parties have mostly accepted that universal healthcare is a thing in Canada and it's not going to change. You do have some, so for example, in Alberta, the current premier there, Jason Kenney, is introducing more and more private sector services into the healthcare system, but usually that doesn't go well with the populace as a whole. Not saying it won't, just typically doesn't. So that's where you have your left and your right. Now, As with anything, people like to make it a little bit more complicated. So we're going to throw in another aspect. Not only do you have the left and right, but you have the up and down. And you can layer them like this. And maybe instead of using my arms, I will put some sort of graphic so you can see what I mean by having that quadrant. The up and down one, looking up and down, that is for your social and your moral issues. And you have what are called progressives, and they're usually at the top. And then you have traditionalists or conservatives at the bottom. It has nothing to do with hierarchy, it's just where they've been placed. Progressives are in favor of change. They say, for example, with trans rights, this is a new group of people that 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, the broad population did not really understand. But now we have, and we understand that protections are necessary. So let's codify that. Let's put that into law, that those protections exist. We will change that in our society. Conservative or traditionalists, they believe that typically that society is fine and nothing really needs to change. So we saw that with same-sex marriage, where many conservatives, many traditionalists said the marriage should remain between a man and a woman. That's a very traditional view, and they don't want that to change. So you have those two ideologies that combat each other. You can have, and the reason why you put the quadrant system like this is because you can have a right wing progressive. And so what that means is they want to spend little money, they want smaller government, they want fewer services and more individual choice, but they believe that society should change as it goes forward. That the way a country was or the way that a society was 50 years ago does not guarantee that it should stay that same way. You could also have a left wing and a traditionalist where they are comfortable spending money, they believe that services should be provided, but that society should remain as it once was, and that they should hold on to their more traditional views and values. Uh, in Canada, it's interesting because we have political parties that span the spectrum. Our Liberal Party traditionally has been mostly in the center. Um, it's really only since Justin Trudeau has taken over as Prime Minister and as leader of that party that it's shifted to the left. In the 1990s and in the early 2000s, the Liberal Party was fiscally to the right. It preferred not to spend as much. It preferred to lower taxes and balance the budget. But it remained progressive. It was willing to change things, willing to open up to new ideas for society. Our Conservative Party actually has shifted more to the right in recent years. It's usually fallen to be a center-right party where it is fiscally conservative, where it's fiscally on the right, does not want to spend money, lower taxes, individual choice, and it's not it's not as traditional as the Republicans in the States, but it is still more traditional. The Conservative Party was the party that really kind of fought against changes in recent years, but originally they were called progressive conservative. So they were willing to move forward just at a slower pace and typically through individual choice. So those are our two major parties. We have our liberals that traditionally have been center but have moved to be a little bit more center left. And we have now just the conservatives, which have traditionally been center right, but are now predominantly just right. You also have your new Democrat Party, which historically and currently very far left. Universal health care, universal pharmacare, universal everything. They believe that government should be more involved. Nowhere near as close as communism. That's a very bad comparison to make. The NDP does not adhere to communist ideology, but they do think there is a role for a much larger government. And so they're on the left and they are progressive. You then have the Green Party, which, much like the Liberal Party, traditionally has fallen in the center. The Green Party is actually quite fiscally conservative, quite fiscally to the right, traditionally, but they are also quite progressive. And so they kind of sit themselves in the middle. They have moved in recent years more towards the left fiscally, I think with the understanding that green technology does cost money, they recognize that that if the government wants to play a role, which being uh, more right wing, that's had to be a shift. They've said that the private sector is not going to do the green shift on their own, and the government will have to play a significant role. And so that's where they've moved closer to the left. And that's kind of where our political spectrum is. And that's what our political spectrum is. It's just where you fall, and it's, in theory, different ideologies, and they kind of tell you what your beliefs are. So when somebody says, oh, I vote for liberal, you can usually tell they're center left. Typically, they might be more to the center, but they're in and around that area. If they say that they're conservative, that means that they're usually to the right, and they're probably more of a traditionalist, conservative in the name. If they say I vote NDP, they're quite far left and they're fairly progressive. If they're green, currently they're probably more to the left as well as progressive. Um, and in Canada, we have really just those four parties, other than in Quebec, which has the Bloc Québécois, which Bloc Québécois, I don't really know where it falls. It kind of changes with each election because Quebec society changes with each election. Um, it's a very interesting party to adhere to, but its sole goal is to make sure that Quebec society is listened to and understood at the federal level. So they don't really have a place in the spectrum. It's whatever is happening at the provincial level. Uh, and that's the political spectrum. Hopefully this video has helped. It's all in the PowerPoint as well. And if you have any questions, as always, let me know. Bye.